What's up, you guys? I'm Benjamin.
I'm Miranda, and welcome back to the Marriages Ministry podcast.
If you're new here or you're not new here, this channel exists to encourage you guys with the Word of God through the lens of our marriage. Our hope and prayer is that through our real lived experiences lumped in with what God's Word has to say in wisdom and in counsel, we are able to encourage you guys in whatever season you are in.
So last time we talked about our birth story of our son, Adriel. And so we're going to continue that discussion in our third part, talking about postpartum and what that looked like for us.
The more that we talked about it and kind of delved into the real lived experiences that came with postpartum, we came to realize that there were a lot of misconceptions that, if we're being honest, we really couldn't be taught. It couldn't be read up on. We had to live it out in real time. And our hope is to encourage you guys through what we had to experience for the past year.
So I think we'll begin at the most obvious, which is just like the physical recovery after birth. So we did have the natural childbirth that we had planned for and wanted. And so everything went well on that end. The only thing from my birth was I did have a 2nd-degree tear, which isn't too bad, but there still was recovery there because I had so many stitches. And for me, that was a brand new experience because I've never broken a bone or been in the hospital really for anything. And so going through that whole process was just new to me and difficult. So the days following giving birth, we actually got discharged from the hospital pretty quick. Within less than 48 hours.
Yeah, like a day and a half.
Yeah. So all things considered, I was recovering well, but it definitely was weird because I literally couldn't get out of bed really on my own. It was just so painful to just stand, just like the motion of getting up.
Yeah.
And so when we got home, my sweet husband had to lower the bed for me so that I could get in and out comfortably. And so those first few days, I really didn't do much. I just stayed in bed with the baby, fed him, changed him, that was it. And luckily, he had the whole week off, so he took care of me and fed me. And so those first few days were just really slow, but as the end of that first week went by, I started to realize like, okay, my body is starting to heal. I was able to get up and move around a lot easier. And it was just amazing to me just how the body just heals so quickly, because it really did feel like traumatic at first.
Yeah.
Because, you're bleeding a lot postpartum, those first few days, even weeks. It's just endless. And I've never had stitches or anything like that. And because it's in such a sensitive area, it was just all new to me. And just every movement felt really uncomfortable. And so after a few weeks, I started feeling better just in general, like being able to move around and do more things around the house and just start to feel like I could move. And so that's kind of how just the physical side went. But as far as internally, you can't really see what's going on. So that kind of led us into just having struggles with our intimate life. The doctors tell you at 6 weeks, right, your appointment, they checked me and they said, well, everything looks good, like you're healing perfectly. So I was like, okay, well, I guess I should be back to normal. But that was not the case for us.
Yes. In fact, in our case exclusively, it was not 6 weeks. I think it was fair, hearing you talk about it just now, you were technically physically capable at 6 weeks, but it was physically very difficult at the same time. In fact, I remember the first time that we tried being intimate after the 6-week window. I think it was about 8 to 10 weeks after. Your body communicated very quickly, it is not ready.
Yeah.
And that was really hard to take. Not because I desired that, because of course I did, and I do.
And so did I.
Yes. But I think it really, at least for me, it really showed just how, women who give birth naturally often use the word traumatic. I didn't quite understand what that meant up until that point, because to see you physically react in a way that was just so foreign as your husband was really, really, really hard to see. Because in those moments, I literally felt helpless in the sense that there was literally nothing I can do physically other than just be there. And that wasn't always easy to process, especially in real time when both of us are feeling a certain way and wanting each other, and we can't fulfill that, at least in the way that we used to before she gave birth.
Yeah.
And again, it's not to say that the doctor was necessarily wrong, but there is a lot of nuance to the fact that you did tear the way that you did, and that did present some challenges. In fact, her doctor, way after, like this is about 6 months later, told her that a lot of what is going on has to do with the amount of scar tissue.
Yeah.
Much like when you cut yourself and then you scab and then you scar, sometimes there are bumps, sometimes there is additional tissue that causes your skin to no longer be smooth or to be level. So imagine that internally, and that would naturally cause preclusions, among other things. I know one of the main things you often talked about was just discomfort.
Yeah.
It didn't physically feel very comfortable. In some cases, often felt painful.
Yes.
So there were definitely a lot of challenges there. I'm grateful to say that we're on the mend now, where your body is definitely healing. It's still a process. We're still kind of mindful. But overall, you've come a long way in your physical healing and recovery postpartum. But needless to say, it was a process.
Yeah, and I think it was one of those things I didn't expect, and I think you didn't. Because I had heard that, if you have a natural childbirth, you actually heal quicker, which I think is true. If you have like maybe minor tearing or no tearing at all, I could see how you probably would just go back to normal. Because technically, like, everything was okay, but like he was saying, there definitely, the way I can explain it is, just felt like there was a knot in there. Like, there's so much like tissue, and I would just swell so easily, and it was just so like uncomfortable, especially early on. You know, as a wife, I just felt like defeated, and just like I couldn't, satisfy my husband, and at the same time just feeling discouraged myself because I couldn't enjoy it either. And it was like one of those things I just like was stuck in my head because I wanted to keep trying, obviously, because that's an area of marriage that's important, right? Being intimate with each other in that way. But at the same time, it was almost felt like I was forcing it too, because I desired it, but then I would get discouraged, and then I'd be in my head before we even began, and it would just be, we were just losing the joy in it. And so I just remember us sitting down and just having really hard but good conversations just about like how to navigate that and what it would look like moving forward. And we just talked about, this was just, we're just gonna have to figure out a different way to do things, you know, and that might have been just not doing things the way we used to and trying out new things, but also building intimacy in different ways, not just the physical. I think that's the big thing we learned through it was, if your marriage is built on just the physical, then it will crumble, and we wanted to make sure that we were building up other areas of intimacy. And he was really great about that. When I finally just like broke down crying to him one night, I was like, I just feel like a failure, but I also feel like I'm just not enjoying this, and it's just too much. We just kind of took a step back from trying and putting so much pressure on it, and instead just tried to enjoy each other's company and just do date nights and hold hands and, be more intentional about planning little fun dates for each other. And conversations, I think, was the biggest form of intimacy we had. Was just, I feel like we connected more on that level.
Yeah. Ironically, that night that you broke down crying and you just felt like a failure, you felt disconnected. Ironically, and I remember telling you, I never felt more connected. Oddly enough, because literally at that point I just said, why don't I just hold you?
Yeah, I remember that.
And we literally just sat there and hugged like for 5-10 minutes. I don't remember how long it was. Then I start crying because then I'm like, I've never felt closer to you than the 5 years that we've been together. It was because at that point the Lord was so faithful to reveal to us that our perception of what intimacy looked like in our marriage was bottlenecked solely just to sex.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that it's a bad thing. It's actually an amazing thing. That's why God created it in the context of marriage. But at that point, we had bottlenecked this idea of intimacy only to the physical. And it's not to say that it has to lead to sex. We hug, we hold hands, we show other forms of affection to each other. But I believe God was really helping us to consider what intimacy looked like in our marriage. And admittedly, it was something that we didn't really think about. There's a lot of things that doesn't really come to the light until you have a kid. And I think a part of that has to do with the fact that in some ways we had to grieve what we lost. I often said around that time that the marriage we had was over and it was replaced with something even more beautiful. It was already beautiful being married to Miranda, it still is. But the context of now having a son at this point in our marriage has enriched our marriage in ways that we couldn't even imagine. But there is that super practical aspect that we did lose a lot of things having our son. And I don't say that in a negative way. I don't say that in a bitter way. I'm really grateful for our son. I think he's really unified. God's really used our son to unify our family in ways that I couldn't even imagine. But the reality is, certain decisions aren't as easy to make anymore. We can't just be spontaneous and do whatever we want when we feel like it. We can't just be intimate at our convenience, at least in the physical sense. On a practical level, we have to get very creative as it relates to just everyday life. And there's a lot of extra things that do come with having a kid. And there are growing pains that come with that. And speaking for myself, there are moments where I often missed the convenience of our marriage before we had a kid because we didn't have to think about so many other things. On a deeper level relating to our marriage, there's a lot that does come at a cost. And there was a lot that we've had to sacrifice as a result. But I believe God has enriched our marriage as a result because it really showed us areas in our hearts where maybe, speaking for myself, I can be more selfish in, that I have to be willing to lay down at the feet of Jesus, understanding that not only do I have a responsibility to lead my wife, to love my wife, to serve my wife, and now our son, but I have really been appreciative of the fact that it is an incredible honor as well. And there's something about having our son, in my case, that the Lord has really spoken into me. Just don't take this for granted. Like, outside of the blessing of marriage and parenthood, don't take the gift of life for granted. In fact, something that I often pray, it's simply put, Lord, give me a newfound reverence of who you are by proxy of what you have blessed me with. That, sure, there are things that I've had to give up in ambition and in dreams and in desires. But if I had to choose those desires and the life that I have with my wife and my son, I would pick my wife and my son any day. And I thought you were saying something.
Yeah, I was smiling.
Because there's something invaluable about what we have in our household as a result. And there was a responsibility on my part to lay myself down in humility, understanding that while these things that I desire are not entirely bad, they can't come first over my marriage. They can't come first over my relationship with God. And I believe in this season, the Lord has really challenged me as the dreamer and the ambitious one to really slow down and reconsider what is most important. And I think the biggest one for me was cultivating intimacy with you outside of these presuppositions that I've had. And certainly within the growing pains of having our son and everything that came with becoming new parents and still trying to function and live in everyday life. So it's had a lot of its ups and downs. It's come with a lot of sacrifice, a lot of challenges, but the Lord has been so faithful to grant us wisdom, capacity, and a desire to press on and move forward with gratitude, with humility, and for all intents and purposes, with joy in our hearts, a newfound joy and reverence.
Yeah, I think that time where the physical intimacy was more difficult, going back to that moment when you just held me, when I opened up to you, and just hearing you say that, you never felt closer to me, it really helped break down just misconceptions in my own mind. Like, we had already been married 3 years, and in my head I'm still assuming, like, oh, my husband desires sex, right? And if I don't give it to him, he's gonna be upset with me, Again, these are just lies from the enemy, that's the only way I could satisfy my husband or cultivate that closeness with him. And so just hearing those words just gave me so much peace, and I think that allowed us to just really build our intimacy in a different way until we were able to, enjoy that again in the physical way. And so that really opened my eyes to also the idea of letting God into your intimacy. We both had talked about how we definitely kept God out of that area, and God just showed me that you need to be praying about your intimacy. It's the closest relationship here on earth, right? Is between husband and wife, and it's a picture of God's relationship with his people in church, and so God created marriage and the intimacy to be an image of that. And so he just kept reminding me to just keep praying and giving it to him. And eventually I wasn't so anxious about it, and I feel like we were able to just kind of let go of all expectations, and almost like newlyweds, just trying to like figure out new ways, to enjoy each other. And eventually it did take a while. It took 10 months of trying different things and just kind of breaking down the scar tissue in there. But eventually we were able to enjoy it, and, but I can truly say God brought us so much closer through all of that. And I think it's all about perspective. You can focus on the negative of like, oh, we can't enjoy each other physically, and only focus on that. But instead we were able to focus on what God did bless us with, and that was each other and our son and just this new season we were in. And like he was saying, I also was grieving just it not being just us anymore. And that was something I didn't expect, because I've always wanted kids. I was definitely the one that wanted kids more in our relationship. Not that he didn't, but I've known since I was like a child that I wanted kids. And so I was just shocked when we had him that I was struggling with just missing it, just being me and him. And, I think there is that aspect that things were just easier, and it was easier to love on my husband. I think that was the hard part for me, was I felt like I couldn't give him all of me anymore, because a baby is a lot, literally physically taking all of you and emotionally. And when you first have a baby, the hormones are just everywhere. And so I just felt like I wasn't available to him like I was before. And that was really hard for me to process. And I think I put a lot of pressure on myself at first, that like I needed to show up more for him and our son and just find that balance. But he was gracious to remind me that it was going to take time to find a new rhythm, and just to keep relying on the Lord, and that he would show me how to do that. And so that was definitely something I struggled with mentally early on, was just balancing married life and now being a mom, and then trying to lump everything else in with that, just things around the house and friendships. And it was just like my whole life was flipped upside down, and it's a huge adjustment.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about postpartum that has really stuck out the most is, I actually thought about this earlier today. Much like marriage, you can get all of the premarital counseling, read up on just about everything, utilize every resource that there is accessible and available to you, and still be in for a major culture shock when you get married. Mm-hmm. And then you multiply that like tenfold when you have a kid. I feel like you're basically like starting all over. Yep. It's not to say that everything that we've done leading up to Adriel was canceled out by any means, but it is to recognize that there is a major shift in the household and the overall dynamic, because there's another human being there now, and this human being is solely dependent on her. And for a good while, it was not at all dependent on me. Like, I didn't exist to Adriel for like...
it took like 6 months.
6 months. That was...
He was definitely a mama's boy all the way.
He probably still will be. I'm grateful to say he's much more attached to me now. Like, he gets really sad when I leave for work. He'll like wave bye to me and then like do this little lip thing where he's like moping, and I'm like, oh, he's about to lose it. I better book it. And then just like drive off. No, but something that the Lord really has challenged me a lot in this past year is to really reconsider what it means to truly be patient, gracious, merciful, loving towards my wife and now our son. And as it relates to the flesh, getting married exposes a lot about yourself, and then having a kid will further expose those areas of your flesh that need work. For me, I'm realizing and have realized it's not that I haven't made progress in certain areas, especially in a desire to serve my wife and to simply do better on that side, because she deserves my best, and more importantly, the Lord deserves my best. But to consider the fact that now that we have our son, I might have to reconsider what that looks like. And admittedly, as a husband, those were moments that were really difficult for me. I often felt like I couldn't really be effective in those moments because, for one, only wants is her. And then there are moments in my flesh where I felt like I'm just not being seen or heard right now. And the Lord had to remind me, Ben, it's not about you right now. Like, I'm not saying you don't matter, but your son literally can't help himself. And he needs not only his mom, but he also needs his dad to die to himself, to put himself aside, and to love him, and to serve him. And that was a hard pill to swallow, because naturally I was so acclimated and familiar to a flow of things in our day-to-day life that just got swept off of its feet with our son being born, that I really had to sit and pray to the Lord, what does it look like to be patient in this season? What does it look like to be gracious and merciful? What does it look like to serve my wife and now our son? These things that I have grown very comfortable with maybe need to be reconsidered or refined a little bit more. There were many moments where that was challenging, where I've had to come to her and just be honest about what I'm feeling. And if I'm being frank, I don't enjoy that. I don't enjoy being vulnerable, because growing up I felt and was kind of told that it was a sign of weakness to kind of talk about your feelings. And I learned very quickly how to bottle it up and not talk about it. And then you lump that in with a desire to serve people. I often would serve people at the expense of myself, which is why in the previous episode you probably heard I said yes to a lot of things. I very rarely said no to anything, and often stretched myself so thin that by the time I did open up about things, I was already burnt out, or I was already at my breaking point when it came to certain things. And I think all of that combined with trying to figure out the day-to-day with the son fleshed out unrealistic and uncommunicated expectations that I had. So in this process of learning what it meant to be patient with my wife, to be gracious with her, to be merciful, to serve her with joy, with gladness, with humility, with gratitude, it really showed me these areas that I had to work on. And it has not at all been comfortable. But it has been comforting to know that God has been in our midst every single step of the way. And he's been faithful to enrich us and to unify us. Which is why in that moment I did say, I have never felt closer than I ever have, because the Lord really opened my eyes to a different perspective of what intimacy looked like and what it meant to serve you in that moment. Because in a moment where I desired to be satisfied, what mattered more to me in that moment was to make sure that you were okay and to effectively serve you exactly how you needed to be. And the Lord was faithful to show me this is what it looks like to truly love your wife and to serve her in a time of need. Like, that time to be satisfied and to be served will come, but right now you need to put that aside and love your wife, serve your wife. That has been a learned process, and it's something we're continuing to talk through and learn. But it's also taken a lot of that pressure off, like you said. Like, there really isn't any expectation other than setting time aside and kind of scheduling when we're going to be intimate with each other, just so we're incredibly intentional. And much like you said as well, that came a lot from literally asking for God to bless our marriage bed and to enrich us with this wisdom of what intimacy looked like, to where that would eventually lead to the physical, because we have cultivated a stronger foundation in other areas, in the emotional, in the mental, in other forms of physical closeness. And in that process, it's made it much easier to be patient, to be gracious and merciful, especially when our son is really, really, really clingy. Teething parents will know what I'm talking about.
Kids are just constantly teething.
Yes.
Let me just, we don't have kids yet. Yeah. When parents say their kids are teething, it's real. It's all the time.
It's code
or
for...
sleep is going all crazy.
Yeah, if you hear words like sleep regression or teething, that's your cue to intercede.
Yeah.
Okay? But all that to say, I'm grateful for this past year, because the Lord has challenged me as a husband, as the headship of our household, to consider what it looks like to truly live out these virtues. I believe he's been faithful to really enrich our marriage as a result, because it has catered to a much more rich and godly sense of intimacy in every aspect of our marriage. And the cherry on top is our sex life being much more pure, if you will. And that's a word that often came to mind, especially in these conversations. Like, there really isn't an expectation other than just to satisfy the other person, and that's made it so much more blessed.
Yeah, I agree. I think God's just been so gracious in this season, again, to reveal things we needed to work on, and for me it was selfishness. I think marriage shows you that at first, but children definitely show you even more, what sacrificial love looks like and how to put yourself aside for others. And it taught me not only to do that for my son, but for my husband, because his needs were also important during that time. I think as women in postpartum, it is easy to make it all about yourself. And obviously at first it does make sense because you're physically healing and there is a lot of real emotion there because the hormones are all over the place and you're trying to take care of this new baby who physically usually relies on you if you're breastfeeding and, doing all the things. And so, it does take a lot out of you. As women, it's easy to make it all about ourselves, but it was important to me that I listened to him and what he was going through and asked him daily, like, how can I serve you today? How can I be better at making you feel loved and appreciated? Because he was doing so much for us, behind the scenes that not everybody sees. Just the daily making me food. I didn't cook for like months. He did all the cooking, and just being there for me and listening to all my irrational fears about our son and if I'm doing this right. And so he was just so faithful and patient during that season. But it also taught him to communicate his needs, which I know he doesn't enjoy, but I've been asking him for years to do it. I'm like, I want to know what you need, and I need you to tell me.
Literally 5 years.
Yeah.
5 years of still asking. I mean, I'm doing better.
Yes, much better now. And I think having children makes you more blunt, too, with each other in a good way.
Yeah.
I feel like we don't hold things in as long, and we just communicate it right out the gate. This is what we need. This is what we need to do, or reevaluate something. And so that's been a beautiful thing coming out of this season, is just our communication is so much better. God has just really shown us how to love like he has. And another thing God's taught me in this season is just how to rely on God alone.
Yeah.
He's just shown me that, he really is just my source of joy and satisfaction. Because being a stay-at-home mom isn't easy. I did choose to leave my job when our son was born and do the stay-at-home mom full-time. And it's hard some days because you're doing the same thing over and over in the same building. And, it's hard to get out with a little one. And, I try to meet up with other moms, but sometimes our schedules don't align or their kids are different ages. And it was just a lot harder than I thought it would be staying home. But God just keeps reminding me daily that, if I seek him first, if I'm keeping my eyes on him, fixed on him, that he will provide me that joy and capacity, as he was saying, to pour into our son each day, to take care of our household, and then to pour into my husband when he gets home and support him in all that he's doing for us. And so God's been just really faithful during the season where, some days I mentally struggled to kind of get out of my head, like, what I'm doing doesn't really matter, or, man, I really wish I could just meet up with somebody or, have more friendships. But, each day God's like, just rely on me. You're all I need. And so that's what he's been teaching me in the season.
I think a big thing that I've been actually saying this a lot lately. I got this from another podcaster. Her name is Ruslan. Shout out, because he's an artist.
All I hear when you say Ruslan is Ruslan, whatever it is. Yeah.
Ruslan. Fire intro. But in any case, he was on another show and he uses workout metaphors. So for those that make fun of him, the guy knows what he's talking about. But, and I might butcher it, so forgive me if this doesn't come across as clearly as I hope it would, but instead of looking at working out as an obligation to meet a certain goal, which on the face isn't entirely a bad thing, something that he's really come to appreciate in this context of working out. Don't just treat it like a chore and do it out of obligation because I need to be in shape or I need to meet X, Y, and Z goal. Fall in love with the process that you may then find joy in the process. That is something that I've been really learning a lot as a husband, as a father, that it comes with a lot of challenges. It comes with a lot of difficulties. And yet I can simultaneously fall in love with the process of navigating these growing pains because it is symbolic and indicative of the Lord's blessing over our household. That, yeah, we have a baby that's popping off right now because he's got 4 teeth cutting at the same time. But that means that he's healthy. That means that he's growing. That means he's developing the way he needs to. That is a symbol of God's blessing over our son, that what we pray for every single day, that he stays healthy, that he continues to grow. We're seeing that lived out in real time. That, among so many other things, is a reason to be joyful in this process of figuring it all out. It's not to minimize any of the frustration, but it is to recognize that as hard as it might be at times, you can still be joyful, knowing that when you shift your perspective even just a little bit, your outlook on said circumstance changes significantly. In fact, as a husband, it's made it easier for me to navigate a lot of those growing pains with Miranda, which is why I'm starting to talk about my needs a lot more and just to be very forthright with her. Even in some cases, praying proactively for what it is that I do bring up to her, so that way I'm not just emotionally dumping on her, especially knowing that she has her own baggage from the day on account of being with our son all day, being at home most days by herself. Being in prayer for all of those things and learning to make it tangible and practical has helped me fall in love with this process of navigating the growing pains. It's not at all easy. And if you guys are going through that, you're not alone. You know, we're living it out in real time where, you know, we're trying to be quiet because our son's asleep. We feel like we're struggling with getting our words out, but we are holding fast to the promise that the Lord is going to use these experiences, use the words that we're saying right now to communicate encouragement rooted in his love, rooted in his truth, because he is the source of our joy. We're able to stand in victory because of his love and that he sent his son to die for us. Sometimes looking at the glass half empty can suck the joy out of the house because we're just looking at everything that's going wrong. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing going right. In fact, when we started shifting that perspective in our household, it's helped us to really enjoy the little things. You know, I just met with my pastor last weekend, and he's just asking, like, hey, how are you and your wife doing? Like, I'm not saying anything's wrong, not saying anything's, you know, bad, or, you know, I've seen anything of concern. I just want to know, like, how are you guys doing? It's been a year, and you guys being parents and navigating everything that comes with an infant, now a toddler, how are y'all doing? And I told him, life is really simple, but I happen to think it's a really good thing. In fact, Ben Shapiro said this once, like, if your life is predictably boring, that means you're doing something right. Because you're making active and conscious decisions that are also beneficial for you and your family. Like, it's not just self-serving, and it is with the intent, in my case, to steward my wife and our son well, that life has become very predictable and pretty regimented, and in some cases very plain. Maybe boring wasn't the right word, because it's quite unpredictable in the day-to-day, which makes it fun. But the day-to-day can kind of become a little bit mundane at times, and I think that's why, kind of to her point, being a stay-at-home mom was a bit of a culture shock for her, because she went from working to literally hard stopping and pumping the brakes, like, and flooring them, to be here every single day.
Yeah, I think just to speak to the moms out there, you know, I'm even struggling right now mentally, just like mom brain and formulating words is hard for me sometimes, but just know that, you know, even if you're struggling with brain fog or you feel like you're not yourself quite yet, because that's a normal feeling too, entering motherhood is just, you give so much to your child all the time, especially being a stay-at-home mom and a mom in general. I mean, if you're working and taking care of your kid, that's a whole other level as well. You do give so much of yourself, it can feel like you just don't even know what you're doing anymore. But just know that, you know, God just asks us to just bring it to his feet in prayer. You know, every day I just ask the Lord that I can be able to show up for my family and, you know, hopefully bless other people as well and serve other people. And hopefully through this podcast, you know, we're able to do that. Even if I don't feel like my words are making sense, I know that God will use it for his glory. And I hope that sharing these experiences postpartum, you know that even at the end of the day that you're just not alone in it. And, you know, my son is over a year now, and I'll be honest, I still have days that I'm like, man, I feel like I should be functioning normal, and I'm not. But then other days I'm feeling good, like, yeah, we're doing it. We're parenting, and we have a good flow of things in our house. But God just reminds me, you know, to just lay it at his feet, right? We all have plans, we all have goals in our mind, but God's the one that directs our path. And so we just have to lay those desires at his feet and, again, shift that perspective each day to just choose joy despite what may be happening, or things may not be going your way that day. Like you said, our son's kind of going through it right now with teething, and he's been screaming just nonstop all the time.
Sometimes unprovoked.
Yeah, joyful screams, but also then he'll get sad screams, and it's just, you know, it's a lot. But in those moments, even I have to just choose to be joyful and see that my son is growing and he's healthy. And the Bible, I don't know what the verse is, but it talks about, you know, we just live in thankfulness. You know, we can't help but just praise God, and we can't really be in a negative mindset if you just think about all the things you're grateful for. So those are just some reminders for you if you're walking through that season right now of just keep praying, keep seeking the Lord's face. That's all he asks of us, and he will supply that peace and joy in whatever season you're in.
Yeah. I can't find that verse that she was referencing, partly because I had another one in mind. In fact, it was one that we went over this past Sunday at our church service, particularly Joshua 1:9. God said, "Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." And the reason why is the next part of that story were the Israelites going to Jericho. That came with a lot of unknown variables that were well beyond their control. And yet the Lord promised them for a multitude of generations, he was going to be there, and he was going to bring them through that, and he was going to be their covering. And I think in the day-to-day, we get so caught up in the vacuum or blender or whatever, you know, kitchen appliance that you want to apply to this, in the day-to-day life, that we don't realize that the Lord is in our midst every single step of the way, or taking it for granted, taking him for granted. But the reality is, he is there. Always. I think it starts with us approaching him with humility, with this simple notion in mind: Lord, help me not to take you for granted. That with your unconditional love, you with your boundless grace, you with your unending mercy, with your indescribable provision for me and my family, help me not to take you for granted, knowing that you're my covering. You are in our midst always, even in these moments. Like literally leading up to this podcast, I've just felt attack after attack from the enemy, because I firmly believe what we're doing here is something that God has blessed. The enemy don't like that. In fact, the enemy is threatened on account of what it is that we're trying to do in obedience to God. And yeah, with that comes a lot of ruffled feathers, a lot of emotions, and a lot of moments of feeling deflated and discouraged, even literally as we speak. And we know that the enemy is already lost. So even just reminding ourselves in this moment, enemy, you've already lost. Like, God has defeated you by the blood of Jesus, and we stand in that victory because of what was done on the cross. We stand in victory because of what God did for us. Sometimes it's as simple as, I mean, we say it jokingly, but we say, like, hey, yo, I rebuke you, Satan. Like,
yeah, we say that a lot.
But again, it's because there is power and authority vested in the Holy Spirit and the truth of the word that comes with that statement. And when we begin to say that with confidence and not from doubt and not from fear, the enemy is frightened. And all glory to God for that, because it's because of what Jesus did for us. Stand in victory, knowing that despite whatever circumstance you might be going through, He is in your midst. He is your covering. He is your stronghold. He is your source of comfort, of peace that surpasses all understanding. I believe when we are humble enough to lay ourselves down at His feet along with these circumstances, no matter how benign or heavy it might be, He is faithful to show up every single time. That as we venture into the unknown, He has promised He is there with us, always. And because of that, we can have confidence. We can not fear. We can rejoice with all gladness and thanksgiving in our hearts, and give thanks to Him as a result. In fact, that's something that we've really felt convicted with cultivating in this season, which is be grateful. You know, there are a million reasons to be fearful, to be ungrateful. There's a billion more to be thankful because of who God is and what He's done, and the fact that we get to stand in that confidence and that victory every single day, especially with, in our case, this newfound perspective on marriage and now having our son, and to be able to simply enjoy the moments that money can't buy. Like, I enjoy ministry and I enjoy the season of life that I'm in, being able to work for my family. But the moment I look forward to the most, two, it's the stuff that she sends me literally during the day, of just the most random stuff that he does. Like, you know, he can be playing with peanut butter jars and be drumming them. Like, it can be the most random thing. That's number one. Number two is coming home to literally our little son walking up towards me with his arms stretched out. And I'm like, fam, I rebuke you, Satan. Like, my son is walking towards me. Like, that is crazy.
If you're in a season that just feels chaotic, or you may not know how to approach it because it's new to you, just like parenthood was new to us and we're still learning, just remember, you know, God just tells us to be still, because in the stillness is when He moves, not by our strength, but by His strength. So just keep your eyes on Him, keep relying on Him, and He will move through you, you know, when you keep your eyes fixed on Him.
Amen. The frustrations and growing pains that come with not only marriage, but marriage as new parents as well, is completely normal. Don't believe the lies of the enemy when you feel discouraged, when you feel defeated. Be faithful to lay those worries down at God's feet, knowing that He will receive those prayers and He will answer them according to His will.